Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And also thank you, Support for Families, for having us again. My name is Raymond. I am an advocate with Disability Rights California. For those who might not know who we are, Disability Rights California, or DRC, we are a statewide nonprofit, and we provide free legal services to people with disabilities with any disability-related issues. So we have attorneys and advocates statewide that can help with different issues, such as access or discrimination with housing, with transportation, with education. We can also help with reasonable accommodation with employment, medical, in-home supportive services, and social security overpayment issue that relates to work. And within our agency, we also have different programs, such as our Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA. They specialize in helping clients of the regional center. And our Client Assistance Program, or CAP, they specialize in helping clients of the Department of Rehabilitation. So everything you see today, the presentation PowerPoint on screen, any website links that might be shared in the chat will be sent to you after the presentation. If you'd like to make an appointment, meet with one of our advocates so you can discuss your particular situation, you can give us a call. Our phone number will be in the chat. It's 800-776-5746. And our phones are open Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 9 to 3. If you call us outside of those hours, you can leave us a message and our advocates will get back in touch with you as soon as possible. So without further ado, I will pass it over to one of our attorneys, Daniel Hernandez, to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Raymond. Good evening, everyone. Like Raymond mentioned, my name is Daniel Hernandez, and I'll be your presenter today. And today's topic is in-home supportive services, also known as IHSS. You can go to the next slide. And so before we begin, we just want to provide the audience a disclaimer that the following presentation is meant for education only and doesn't constitute legal advice nor counsel. And that's because your situation may be unique and require careful attention. Also, keep in mind that the information in these slides could become out of date in the future. And that's because the laws and local practices relating to these matters are constantly developing. So if you do refer to this material 2 years from now, the information may not be correct at that time. You can go to the next slide. Now here you see an overview of what we'll be discussing today as it relates to in-home supportive services, or IHSS. So first, what is IHSS? Who is eligible for IHSS? What kinds of services does IHSS provide? How does one apply for IHSS? And finally, we'll be speaking about appeals, or if somebody disagrees with a county's decision, how can they go about addressing that? Okay, can go to the next slide. So generally, what is in-home supportive services, or IHSS? So IHSS is a Medi-Cal program for people, including children, with disabilities that allow them to remain safely in their homes. And this is an alternative to out-of-home placement, such as nursing homes or assisted living facilities. So IHSS provides basic services to people who can't safely perform the tasks themselves or who need prompting or help. Some examples include reminders, robo-reminders, encouragement, physical assistance. So IHSS is administered by each county in the state of California under the direction of an agency called the California Department of Social Services, and its initials in English, that's CDSS. Okay, go to the next slide. So that was a brief description of what IHSS is. Now, the question is, who is eligible for IHSS? So any California resident is eligible for IHSS, but the following has to be satisfied. The person has to be blind, disabled, which also includes children with disabilities, or the person has to be 65 years of age or older. That's one requirement. Another requirement is that the person has to be eligible for Medi-Cal or for SSI benefits. SSI being the Supplemental Security Income Program under Social Security. In all cases, Medi-Cal eligibility is the most important, right? Because for people that receive SSI benefits, they also automatically receive Medi-Cal. They're eligible for Medi-Cal. Another requirement is that the person has to live in a home or an apartment. And this does not include a hospital, a nursing home, assisted living facility, or a licensed care facility. And in the next slide, we'll discuss a little bit about what home means, or own home under the IHSS program. And lastly, the last requirement is that the person can't live safely at home without assistance. So these 4 conditions have to be met in order for someone to be eligible for IHSS. We can go to the next slide. So I mentioned earlier that the person has to be living in a home or an apartment. Home has a very specific definition. So under California law, a home is what they call an abode of your own choosing. So this means that not only single family homes or apartments are considered, there are other situations that can be considered as a home. And here we have a list of some of them, which are known as alternative living situations. An example is a person that lives in an RV or a trailer or a mobile home, a person who lives in a shelter, a homeless shelter, or a shelter for someone who is unhoused. We also have emergency extraordinary circumstances. And I'm going to provide an example of this because this one's not so self-explanatory. So an example of this would be someone who is evicted from their home. And so they begin staying with a family member temporarily until they can find a replacement housing. So that's an emergency extraordinary circumstance that would be allowed under the IHSS program. And here you'll see a link to what's called an all-county letter, or by its acronym in English, ACL. And these are letters that are published by the California Department of Social Services that contain guidance to counties when the counties administer certain programs like IHSS. So this letter that you could definitely look at and read provides more information about what a home can be considered under the IHSS program. So we can go to the next slide. So this is a question, so hopefully this will be interactive. And I'm gonna pose a situation or a hypothetical and then a question. And if you can, in English and Cantonese and Spanish, if you could put your answer in the chat. So Martha is 32 years of age. Martha is disabled, which makes it difficult for Martha to safely perform tasks at home by herself. She used to live in an apartment located in Long Beach, but she recently moved because she cannot afford rent with the SSI benefits that she receives each month. She now temporarily resides in a friend's home in Downey. Is Martha likely eligible for IHSS? And you have two options, yes or no. So if you can put in the chat in Spanish, in English, and Cantonese, what is the correct answer here? Is Martha likely eligible for IHSS? Yes or no? We'll give people a few moments. Okay. Thank you. A lot of you are answering in the chat. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you. I think we could go on to the next slide. So 100% of you were correct. Martha is likely eligible for IHSS. So let's go over this information. So the first criteria, is Martha blind, disabled, or 65 years of age or older? Yes, Martha is disabled. The next question, is Martha eligible for Medi-Cal or SSI? Yes, Martha receives SSI. So she automatically receives Medi-Cal as well. The next question, is Martha living in what's considered a home under the IHSS program? The answer is yes. She is in an alternative living situation. She was evicted and is now temporarily staying with a friend. So this is allowed under the IHSS program. And based on what we know, is it true that Martha cannot live safely at home without assistance? Yes, we can say that that's true. So for these reasons, Martha is likely eligible for IHSS. Thank you. Go to the next slide. Oh, and I see that I'm purple. See if I can fix that. Okay, there we go. That happens every once in a while. I don't know why. Okay, so now the question is, what kinds of services does IHSS pay for? So there's a few, and we have a list of categories here, which we'll explain a little bit later on. But let me read the list to you. So we have domestic services, related services, personal care services, accompaniment to medical appointments, for example. We have paramedical services, we have time-limited services, and we have protective supervision. And here at the bottom of the slide, we have a link to an IHSS notice of action by its initials in English, NOA. And this notice of action has a list of all of these services, which we'll go over in the next few slides. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So let's first talk about domestic services. So domestic services are general household chores in order to maintain the cleanliness of the home or the space that a person lives in. And here we have examples of what some activities of domestic services include, and I'll read them to you. So we have sweeping, vacuuming, washing and waxing of floor surfaces, washing kitchen counters and sinks, cleaning the bathroom, storing food and supplies, taking out the garbage, dusting and picking up, cleaning the oven and the stove, cleaning and defrosting the refrigerator. This next one is a little interesting. Bringing in fuel or heating or for cooking purposes from a fuel bin in the yard, if that is your cooking situation. And the reason why this is here is because there's still rural parts of California where people still rely on this manner of cooking. where they have to bring in fuel to heat food in their homes. So that's why that's there. And the last one is changing bed linens. Okay, and go to the next slide. So next we have related services. And these may seem similar to domestic services, but these are separate and independent to domestic services. So this includes meal preparation or meal cleanup. Meal preparation is planning a menu, preparing the food, which could involve cooking and serving the meal. Meal cleanup is cleaning up after the cooking area, washing, drying, and putting away dishes or utensils, and even loading and unloading a dishwasher. Next, we have laundry, which is washing, drying, folding, and putting away clothes, and household linens like blankets, bed sheets. Next, we have grocery shopping, which can include making a grocery list, loading or unloading food that was purchased. And we also have other shopping and errands. So that includes picking up prescriptions for a person, buying them clothes or toiletries. It can also include reading important documents, such as medication instructions, reading food labels, reading bills. So that's other shopping and errands. You can go to the next one. The next one is the biggest group of services under IHSS, and they're called personal care services. So we have feeding. We also have bathing, oral hygiene, and grooming. We also have bowel and bladder care. And what that is assisting a person with using the toilet, including getting on and off the toilet, using a urinal if a person uses it, emptying and cleaning an ostomy bag, or emptying and cleaning an enema. It also includes applying diapers or disposable underwear. It even includes wiping and cleaning a person if they can't do that. And then it also includes washing and drying the person's hands before and after they use a restroom. We also have dressing, where you assist a person to put on and take off their clothes. We also have transfer. And this is helping to move a person from a bed, a chair, a wheelchair, to another device, to another bed, to another chair, usually within the same room. Ambulation is next, and that's help with walking, getting in and out of cars, and that could be throughout the house or the home, not just within one room. Next, we have help with prostheses, which includes leg braces, visual hearing aids, artificial limbs. So helping somebody take off or put on a leg brace, for example, or a prosthetic device. Next, along with it, they're usually together under the notice of action, but you have help with medications, and that includes reminding a person to take their medication and setting up their medication in metasets, which are those plastic organizers where you can organize pills and tablets. And some things that are not included here that are worth mentioning. One of them is repositioning. So if you have somebody who needs range of motion exercise or physical therapy exercises at home, that is another service that can be provided. Also menstrual care, if a person has to use menstrual products, those are two other services that can be provided under this category. So this is the big bulk of the services. These are personal care services. So if we can go to the next slide. Next, we have time-limited services, which means that they are not provided every month indefinitely. They're only provided for a limited time. We have heavy cleaning, which is helping a person clean the home to remove hazardous debris or dirt. And this is provided one time only. It can be. Next, we have removing yard hazards, and that includes removing weeds or high grass or anything in a yard that can pose a fire hazard. That's also provided one time only. We also have shoveling ice or snow if you live in an area where it snows. So that includes removing ice and snow or other hazardous things from entrances and walkways. And lastly, we have teaching and demonstration. So time under IHSS can be provided for teaching and demonstrating services to someone that receives IHSS. And there, the teacher would be the IHSS provider. So there, you can receive hours for teaching and demonstrating in the following services. So domestic services or housework, meal prep, meal cleanup, laundry, bathing, feeding, dressing, and yard work. And these are not provided one time only. They can be provided up to 3 months. And that's important to remember. Teaching and demonstration can be provided for up to 3 months. So after the 3rd month, these services would be discontinued or they would stop, right? Teaching and demonstration. And again, I'll say it one more time. There's a 3-month maximum for teaching and demonstration. Okay, we can go to the next slide where we have another question. It's a true or false question. So let me read the statement and then please tell us in the chat what option you think is correct or whether this is true or false. So a person that is being assessed for in-home supportive services can receive hours that allow a provider to teach or demonstrate how to do routine laundry for a 13-month period. Is this statement true or false? If you can put that in the chat, that would be great. And I'll remind you that teaching and demonstration is a time-limited service. We'll give it a few moments to allow people to answer. Okay. Great. We can go to the next slide. This was an easier one. So the correct answer here is false. So teaching and demonstration is limited to a 3-month period, not a 13-month period. So this statement is false. Okay, go to the next slide.
Is that per fiscal year?
Sorry, I believe I heard somebody asking a question, which I can answer. No worries. We don't have to wait to the end of the presentation. So somebody asked if this is a service that's provided every year. No, it's actually only provided once. So as soon as you receive it, if you're an IHSS recipient, you will no longer receive it in the future. Okay, so next we're going to talk about protective supervision. And here we have a list of requirements or things that have to be shown for a person to be eligible for protective supervision, which is a service that's provided to people with mental health or cognitive impairments and that have certain behaviors that could put them in danger or at risk of injury. And so this service is provided to protect those people from putting themselves in danger or injuring themselves. So here we'll go over the requisites or requirements that have to be established. One, the person has to have a mental illness or a mental impairment or a cognitive condition. So it could be autism, it could be intellectual disability, it could be schizophrenia. It has to be a cognitive condition. Next, a person has to be non-self-directing. And, there's a definition for this, and we'll go into more detail in regards to non-self-directing. So this means that a person cannot appreciate the dangers or the risks of harm that are caused by certain behaviors. And a county or social worker will evaluate 3 things in order to determine whether a person is non-self-directing. They'll first look at memory, which is being able to remember behaviors and information. Next, they'll look at orientation, and that's an awareness of time, awareness of place, awareness of self, and awareness of other people in one's environment. And then they'll look at judgment, and that's the ability to make decisions in a way that won't put the person in danger. So the county or IHSS social worker will look at these 3 areas. And so if there is an impairment in those areas, it is more likely that the person is non-self-directing. Okay, we can, no. And then the next requirement is that the person requires 24-hour supervision to protect them from hurting themselves, from hazards or accidents. This means that the risks of harm have to be frequent and unpredictable. And for that reason, it requires constant supervision. So let's talk about this, right? Let's talk about when something is predictable and something is not predictable. So let's use the example of a person that turns on the hot stove and leaves it on. So what would be predictable there? So let's say that only happens when a caregiver is cooking. And even though the person is given an opportunity, the person does not turn on the hot stove and leave it on. They only do so when the caregiver is around, right? That behavior is predictable because we know whenever the caregiver is around, the person will turn on the stove and leave it on. Now, what would be unpredictable? So if the person does it at various times throughout the day, whether the caregiver is there or not, then that's unpredictable behavior. You cannot predict it. So that harm is frequent and unpredictable, which means that the person would require 24-hour supervision. But if it's predictable, let's say there's only harm when a caregiver is around, because it's predictable, it doesn't require 24-hour supervision. Now, for children under 18 years of age, there is an additional requirement. So you have to show that that child needs more supervision than a child of the same age without a mental impairment or a mental disability. And a question to ask there is, does it take more time and more intensity to care for the child when compared to a child of the same age without that mental disability? So these are the requirements in order to find someone eligible for this service of protective supervision. We can go to the next slide. So I mentioned, right, there's behaviors that could put somebody in danger or risk of harm. So what kind of behaviors would these be? Here we have a list of some examples. The more common ones, one of the behaviors could be wandering away from the home and getting lost, eating non-food or non-edible objects or items, wandering into the street without checking for cars, attempting tasks beyond someone's physical or mental capabilities, and at the same time not understanding that they could put themselves in danger. One common example of that are individuals that climb high spaces. Of course, if they fall, right, they can hurt themselves. Another example is turning on the stove and forgetting to turn it off. In certain situations, biting yourself or scratching yourself or even hurting yourself in other ways. Also, lack of stranger danger awareness or not understanding that strangers or people that you don't know might pose a danger. And so here at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a link to a form called the SOC 821 form. And this is, the title of the form is Assessment of Need for Protective Supervision, which a doctor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, or even neurologist can fill out. And that's where the professional will state whether memory, orientation, and judgment are, if there's no impairment, if there's a mild impairment, or if the area is severely impaired. So again, the more severe the area, the likelier that the person may receive protective supervision if they can meet all the other requirements. It also asks questions if the person can physically put themselves in danger. And why that question is asked is because, let's say you have an individual who is paralyzed from the neck down, right? So that person may not have the physical ability to put themselves in danger. So although they might have other behaviors that could put themselves at risk because they can't physically hurt themselves, then protective supervision will likely not be granted or approved. And then it also has a section where the doctor can talk about any injuries that a parent or family member may have relayed to them, because that's important. Okay, go to the next slide. So those are examples of when protective supervision may be needed. Now, let's talk about another thing, right? When is protective supervision not available? In other words, in these situations, if your situation falls in this list, it's likely that the behavior would not require protective supervision. And I'll go over the major ones. One of them is when the need is caused by a medical condition and the form of supervision required is medical. A common example of that is, let's say, somebody who has diabetes and needs supervision in case they become hypoglycemic and need an insulin shot, right? In that case, right, protective supervision would not be required because protective supervision is for behaviors emanating or based on a person's mental disability or mental condition. Another example of that would be somebody who has epileptic seizures. So protective supervision would not be provided for that. Also, another big one is to prevent or control antisocial or aggressive behavior. So think of people that get into fights or destroy property. So that may not require protective supervision. Another big one is to guard against deliberate self-destructive behavior. And I've seen that this is probably the main reason that counties or social workers want to use to deny protective supervision, where they state that because a child deliberately tries to hurt themselves, then they don't require protective supervision. So one example of this that we often use is, let's say that you have a young child who, let's say, scratches their neck, right? But they do so with the intention of getting their parents to do something, right? Let's say that they want to go outside to play or they want some candy, and because they're not receiving it, they injure themselves because they know that the parent will give them something, let's say the candy or a toy, in order for them to stop. That means that the child is deliberately hurting themselves. So that would not qualify for protective supervision. However, in a lot of cases, it's because of the mental condition or cognitive condition that the individual has those behaviors, right? There's no intention. A child with autism, for example, can have repetitive behaviors or be overstimulated in some situations so that they may hurt themselves. They may hit themselves, right? Punch themselves, scratch themselves, bite their hands. And that's in response to being overstimulated, which is something that occurs with people with a cognitive disability or a developmental disability like autism. So every situation is different. But again, as long as you know reasons in which protective supervision may be denied, you'll be able to argue that these don't apply. Okay, go to the next slide. Next, we're going to talk about paramedical services. So paramedical services are prescribed by a doctor for a person's health, and they require some training and judgment to perform. And here I'm going to read what the law defines it as. And this is according to California law. So in-home supportive services include those necessary paramedical services that are ordered by a licensed healthcare professional who is lawfully authorized to do so, which persons could provide for themselves, but for their functional limitations. So you probably hear this or read this and think, well, what does that mean? So before we go to the next slide, I will point out that we have a publication. DRC has a publication where you can learn more about paramedical services. So you can certainly visit that link to read that information. But we can go to the next slide and we'll summarize what the law just stated. So that means that paramedical services are provided when a person can't perform a service for themselves, right? They can't do it independently, when that activity is necessary to maintain the person's health, and that service requires training and judgment to perform. And that can include puncturing skin, inserting a medical device into a body orifice. It could mean administering an injection. Those are things that require training and judgment. So we can go to the next slide to provide all of you examples of some of these. So here we have a list of examples of what a paramedical service can look like. So administering medications or giving injections. And for administering medications, right, that can include crushing pills or tablets if you need to, cutting them, right? It could also include if you have to provide liquid medication, inserting like a bulb into the throat so that they can, and for young children, I've seen this more commonly, where they need to administer it directly into the throat. That's the paramedical service. Also, range of motion exercises or physical therapy exercises. Also applying pressure to sores or wounds. Also catheter insertions, bowel programs, right? Digitally with your fingers, stimulating the rectum to facilitate bowel movements. Also enemas or inserting suppositories, tube feeding like G-tubes, or trachea care and suctioning. So these are all examples. So for this service, in all cases, you're required to fill out a form. The doctor is required to fill out a form, and we have a link to that form here, which is the SOC 321. So the doctor will fill it out. They will put a list of all the different paramedical services that may qualify. Also, they have to provide exactly how much time it takes. For instance, for each time that you have to administer medications, for example, or let's say you have to inject insulin, how long does it take you to do all of that? How long does it take you to wash your hands, right? How long does it take you to prepare the needle, to inject it into the person, right? It takes 5 minutes each time, and it has to be done twice a day, right? The doctor has to indicate that on the form. And almost in all cases that I've seen, the county will not provide pushback for this. You know, they'll, as soon as they receive this form, they'll increase the IHSS hours that are received. And for this, you don't have to wait until the annual assessment. You can fill out this form at any point, turn it into the county, and the county will then provide a new notice of action that reflects an increase in hours. Okay, can go to the next slide. So children, we mentioned children before with protective supervision. So, you know, where the criteria looks a little bit different for children. So IHSS does take into account the needs that a disabled child may have when they exceed those of a child without disabilities. So an eligible child with a disability can receive the following services: personal care services, related services, paramedical services, protective supervision, and accompaniment to medical appointments or approved places. And what I will say about this is that we do speak to clients often, and I've seen in a lot of situations where IHSS social workers will state a child is not eligible for this service because they're too young. They're only 3, they're only 4 years of age, so they're not eligible for this service. That is not true. It's only true for one service, and that's domestic services or household chores. But a person or a child who has an extraordinary need can be eligible for any of the other services, depending on the situation. An example that we often use is routine laundry, right, which is a related service. So a child can be eligible for routine laundry if there's an extraordinary need. Let's say we have a 7-year-old who is has incontinence, meaning, you know, they can't hold their bladder, right? Or you know, they urinate or defecate on themselves, right? That's because of their disability, let's say. So the child has an extraordinary need, meaning that the needs of the child are far beyond what is expected of a child of the same age without those functional impairments or the disability. So time for laundry can be provided because a parent would have to wash their clothing regularly, right, once a day. And that's something that is not usual for a child of the same age without a disability or the same functional impairment. So if a social worker says that the child is too young to receive that service, know that that is not correct. If there's an extraordinary need, a service can be provided. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, which is another question. This is kind of a longer one. So we're gonna, as a group together, we're gonna go through this. So we're gonna read the hypothetical and then we're gonna go over the 2 questions that we have here. So let me read the situation first. So David is 52 years old. He receives full scope Medi-Cal because he has limited income, and he regularly sees a doctor because he has type 1 diabetes. Recently, David was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. He lives alone with no help. So due to his mental disability, David has accumulated a lot of debris and waste in his home. He forgets to eat and can't properly bathe himself. He tries to cook, but has left the stove on and unattended. While outside, he often wanders around with no direction. He often forgets to take his medication. He has family members that are out of state that he's not close to. And despite David's wishes, his family members want to place him in an assisted living facility. What options are available to David? So we have two questions that we'll go over in the next two slides. So the first question is he eligible for IHSS? And the second question is what services can he receive? What service do we think he can receive? So we can go to the next slide. And you won't have to write in the chat, right? Because it's a lot and we'll go over this together. Okay. So the first question is he eligible for IHSS? So let's go over the information. So do any of the following situations apply? Is David blind? Is he 65 years of age or older? Or is he disabled? Here the answer is that he's disabled. Okay, great. We can check off that requirement. The next one, does a person receive any of the following? SSI or Medi-Cal? Here the information tells us that David receives Medi-Cal. Next, does a person live in their own home or live in a home? So it doesn't include a hospital or nursing home, assisted living facility, or another facility. So here we're told that David lives in his own home. Okay, great. We can meet that requirement. The next one, can David live safely in his home without assistance? Based on what we read, we can state that he can't live safely at home without assistance. He needs assistance in order to live safely in his home. So we can also check that off. We can go to next. So David in this situation would be eligible for IHSS. So we could go to the next slide. So now the question is, what services can David receive? And here we have a list of all those services. And I think the argument can be made for a lot of these domestic services, right? Due to his Alzheimer's or dementia, he forgets to do certain tasks. So domestic services can apply here. Same goes for meal preparation, meal cleanup, laundry. He may also need help with feeding and dressing. Also accompanying to medical appointments, right? We're told that he can't safely navigate his way around outside of the home, so he may need help. Protect supervision, right? He turned on the stove and forgot to turn it off, or he's wandered. So protective supervision may apply here. Paramedical services, right? It may also apply here. Because he has type 1 diabetes, so maybe he needs insulin, right? So that would be a paramedical service. Time limited services, right? He has a new provider, let's say, so the provider can provide heavy cleaning, yard hazard abatement, and maybe teaching and demonstration may not apply here, right? Because David may not have the capacity to learn to do things because he might forget, so that may not apply here. So those are all the different services that David may be eligible for. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So how are hours calculated under the IHSS program? So it will depend what program you are in, and we're not going to go over all of these programs in detail, but they all have their eligibility requirements and the maximum amount of hours that one can receive if they're in a particular program. But there are four. There's a community first choice option program, or by its English initials or acronym CFCO, and most people will be placed in this program. Next, we have the Personal Care Services Program, which is PCSP. Next, we have the IHSS Plus Option Program, or IPO. And then lastly, we have the IHSS Residual Program. And that's one where share of cost may be paid. So under every one of these programs, there is going to be a maximum amount of hours that can be provided. But for CFCO, for example, the maximum hours that can be provided each month are 283 hours, depending, right, on the severity of a condition. But that's the max. Next, we have proration, something that we want to talk about. So this will depend on a person's living arrangement. So if a provider lives with the person that receives IHSS, and the provider does tasks for both themselves and the IHSS recipient, time for some services can be reduced. So for example, if you live live with your IHSS recipient and you're a care provider and you do shopping for food, right? But you shop for both yourself and the person that receives IHSS. And let's say the max that can be provided is an hour. So because there's two people and the provider is shopping for two people, then the recipient will receive 30 minutes, right? They reduce it by the amount of people. So that's proration. And that applies to related services. So meal cleanup, and meal preparation, routine laundry, right? All of those apply. Shopping for food. Also, alternative resources may reduce the amount of hours that a person receives. For example, if a person is in a child daycare center or even an adult daycare center, time that's spent there where other individuals, employees of that daycare, do services for the individual, then time can be reduced. That's a possibility. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So here you see a lot of text, and I'll go through each one briefly. So the first thing that you see here is something known as the IHSS assessment, clarifications and tools. And we have a link here, and it provides information about how social workers evaluate information as they're doing their assessments, and providing hours and providing ranks. So what happens is that social workers will use a ranking system of 1 through 5. And then I'll explain what each rank is. But so they say we have the service of dressing. A social worker will provide a rank of 1 through 5. And each is the capacity to do something independently, or how difficult it would be for an individual to complete a certain task. Rank 1 means that the person can do something independently. Rank 2 means that the person needs verbal assistance to complete a task. Rank 3 means that the person needs some human assistance, like physical assistance. Rank 4 means that the person needs substantial human assistance, so they can perform a function with only a lot of human help. Rank 5 means that the person is totally dependent on another person, so they can't perform the function with or without human assistance. And so a social worker will provide one ranking, and depending on what rank they provide, there's a chart. And you see here called the hourly task guidelines, and that'll tell you how much time a social worker will provide, depending on what rank the social worker assigned to the individual. And what I'll say, that's something very, very important, is that these are guidelines. meaning that they're not the maximum hours that a person can receive because every situation is different and exceptions can be made if more time is needed. But again, that's on a case-by-case basis. But as a general rule, that's how social workers provide times for certain services under IHSS.
Question.
Okay,
You
can go to the
mentioned-
next slide.
I have a question.
Yeah, I think,
So sorry. If you want, I think we have like 6 or 7 more slides, and then we are going to stop the recording and we will do the Q&A. Thank you.
so, and if you don't want to forget your question, please put it in the chat and we'll definitely get to your question. Thank you, Flavia. Okay, so now how do you apply for IHSS? So you will first start by contacting their local IHSS county welfare office and applying. And here we have a link with the contact information for all the IHSS county offices across the state. Here we also have a link to the application, which is Form SOC 295. We also have a healthcare certification form, which is something that is required. Generally, right, for the most part, it's required, but it's a form that a doctor or medical professional will fill out to confirm that the person needs in-home supportive services. And then you generally have, when you apply, right, once that form is provided, you generally have 45 days to have it filled out and signed by a doctor and then to turn it in to the county. Next slide. So as part of the process to apply, there'll also be an assessment that's done by an IHSS social worker. And this is an in-home assessment where the social worker will come to the home, you know, have a tour of the home, also speak to the individual that is going to receive IHSS services and to get a gauge of what their rank would be in a certain service or their functional limitations. And they use all of this information to make a determination of how many hours a person may receive, or even if they're eligible for IHSS. So here we have a publication that DRC has created. It's IHSS self-assessment. So it's a template of how you could fill out your observations or any comments you have as to all the services under IHSS.
So sorry. I think something happened with the interpretation and never we are hearing you. So sorry. I'm going to... perdón, Never, te estamos escuchando. I'm going to... So sorry, Daniel.
Oh, no, it's okay.
think now it's working. Okay,
Yes, I think so
great.
too. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So sorry for interrupting.
No worries. Yeah, so part of it, DRC has a publication where you can complete a self-assessment, where you can put your comments or observations as to what a person should receive in the IHSS hours, and also a guide to the fair hearing process. So let's say you don't agree with the social worker's decision, you can always appeal, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So we also have that information in that publication. And then lastly, what will happen as part of the application process is that the county will issue a notice of action, which will state you were found eligible for IHSS. These are the services that you're eligible for, and this is the time that you will receive for those services. We can go to the next slide. So let's say that you receive this notice of action and you disagree with it. You think that the social worker was incorrect. Even one service you believed was incorrect. You felt that the individual should have received more. Or there may be a service that the person didn't get or was found eligible for, and you disagree with that. You can appeal, meaning you can challenge that decision. And you generally have 90 days to appeal the decision in the notice of action. But if you're already receiving IHSS and you go through an annual assessment. They do it every year, and you disagree under the new notice of action. Let's say they want to reduce your hours. It's important that you appeal as soon as possible, but appeal before the effective date of the notice of action. Because if you do that, you'll continue to receive the same amount of hours during an appeal. And that's very important for people whose hours are going to be reduced. And here we have a link to the State Fair Hearings Division, where you could also appeal online. You can also call. There's a number that you can call if you want to appeal a decision. So those are generally or you can submit an appeal in writing, but I find that the quickest way to do it is to do it online or to call the State Hearings Division. And again, here we have a link to our publication that also functions like a fair hearing guide that goes through the process of an appeal. Okay, great. So next we can go to the next slide, which will be the last question. And so question 4, I'm going to read the situation and then ask a question, and then we have 4 options here. So Daniel was approved for 283 hours of services a month under the Community First Choice Option Program of IHSS. The following year, Daniel had a reassessment, and the IHSS social worker issued a notice of action, reducing the hours to 142 hours. The notice of action is dated June 13th, 2025. However, Daniel's condition has not changed. He received the notice on June 16th, 2025, and the reduction will take effect on July 1st, 2025. What should he do if he wants to keep his IHSS hours the same during the appeal? What should Daniel do? Remember, the county wants to reduce the hours. The notice of action will take effect on July 1st, 2025. So is the correct answer A, ask the social worker for a reassessment, B, appeal the decision within 90 days, C, appeal the decision before reduction takes effect and request aid paid pending, or D, B or C, option B or C? This one's a trick one. We'll give people a few moments to answer in the chat. This is probably the most difficult of the questions. Okay, great. I think we can go to the next slide to reveal the correct answer. So the correct answer here is C, and a lot of you did get it correct. So C, Daniel should appeal the decision as soon as possible, but before the notice of action takes effect. So if David wants to receive aid paid pending, meaning if he wants to continue receiving the same hours while his appeal is ongoing, he should also request aid paid pending. However, if he waits 90 days, right, to present an appeal, he would not be receiving, the reduction would take effect on July 1st, 2025. So at the 90 days, he's already receiving a reduction. There's already a reduction. So if he wants to keep the same hours, he has to appeal before July 1st, 2025. So answer C is a correct option here. Thank you, everybody. We can go to the next slide. Here we have a few resources for all of you, and I believe you will be receiving a copy of this presentation, so you'll have access to these links. First, we have publications that relate to in-home supportive services that DRC has created. We also have a link to information on how you can get a hold of us if you want help with an IHSS issue. Also, we have a link to the IHSS regulations or the laws that relate to IHSS. And we also have a link to the California Department of Social Services website regarding IHSS. You can go to the next slide. We have a link to the California Department of Social Services IHSS Training Academy. And this is a great resource. So these are the materials that the counties and the state uses to train IHSS social workers. So all the materials that social workers use to train is available to the public. And you can find them at this link here. And it has a lot of great information. And lastly, there's this is a change that happened some time ago, but fairly recently. So the parent provider rules for minor IHSS recipients was changed recently, and the restrictions were eliminated. So you can visit that link and that publication to read more. And I think we can go to the next slide, and then I believe we can stop the recording and we can take questions.